Late spring in the northern forest, the sunlight is clear, the air bright, and last night's storm has left a few old pines torn from the earth. Relic suddenly stops on a forgotten logging road, moss thick over cracked gravel, as if time itself tried to bury it. The wind carries the scent of wet bark and rust, and something in the silence feels unfinished. Half hidden between leaning trunks stands an old military container truck, its steel eaten by orange-brown corrosion, swallowed by 18 years of wilderness. Declan doesn't move closer at first. He just stares, jaw tightening, as if the forest has handed back a memory he once tried to outrun. Because some things aren't lost. They're waiting. Before we step into what he remembers, tell me where you're watching from. And don't forget to like and subscribe to The Last Command K9. Late spring in the northern woods had a way of making even old grief look almost polite. The air was bright and clean, rinsed by the storm that had rolled through the night before. Sunlight filtered through tall pines in pale slanted sheets, turning mist into something you could almost hold. Water droplets clung to needles and fern fronds, trembling whenever the breeze passed. The forest smelled of wet bark, crushed moss, and the faint mineral bite of stone freshly exposed. Declan Voss moved through it like someone who didn't want to be seen, even by the trees. At 43, he still carried the shape of his training. Broad shoulders, a compact, hardened strength that wasn't built for show. His face was all angles and restraint. A strong jaw shadowed by a short, rough beard that looked more practical than intentional. His eyes, blue-gray, deep-set, had the steady, tired focus of a man who had learned to measure distance in risks. Sun and weather had browned his skin to a permanent tan, as if the forest had been claiming him slowly for years. He wore the same things he always wore out here, because consistency was its own kind of safety. An olive field jacket softened at the seams, a red and deep blue plaid shirt beneath it, dark blue cargo pants, and scuffed brown leather boots worn down by miles of rock and root. An old military watch sat dull against his wrist. A folding pocket knife rode in a simple clip. An Eberly stock half-track pack hugged his back, not as a statement, just a habit that had outlived the world that gave him the habit in the first place. Beside him, Relic moved without the need to announce himself. The German Shepherd was 9 now, past the hot, reckless energy of youth, into something quieter and sharper. His coat was black and tan, short and dense, slicked dark where rain still clung to him. His muzzle carried the faintest dusting of silver, as if time had started to write on him in pencil. He didn't prance, didn't pull. He walked with a disciplined patience, head low when he needed scent, head up when he needed space. Every few seconds his ears adjusted like instruments, reading the world in frequencies Declan could not hear. Relic wasn't a dog that begged for affection. He was a dog that noticed things first. They weren't on a trail. Not the kind that hikers used, anyway. Declan preferred places that didn't have names on maps, places that didn't invite casual company. He followed a line of higher ground where the forest thinned just enough to see the shape of the land. Storm damage was everywhere. Snapped branches, puddles in shallow depressions, a few young trees bent like they'd tried to bow and failed. Relic stopped so abruptly, Declan almost walked into him. The dog's entire body went still, not tense in panic, but locked, deliberate. His paws planted, his head angled towards something off to the left. No growl, no bark, only that strange, absolute freeze that Declan had learned to respect like a warning sign. Declan's first instinct was to search for the obvious. A bear, a cougar, a stranger. His second instinct, the one he trusted more, was to watch Relic's eyes. They weren't fixed on movement. They were fixed on a place, Declan followed the line of Relic's stare through the trees and saw what looked like nothing at first. A strip of darker ground under ferns, a slight gap where moss didn't quite grow right. The storm had torn something up. A large pine lay on its side like a fallen mast, roots exposed, soil and stones tangled in its belly. The air felt different there. Not colder, not warmer, just wrong in a way that didn't have a temperature. Declan stepped closer, and the wet ground swallowed sound beneath his boots. He kept his hands loose at his sides, his body casual, as if the forest might be offended by a sudden display of readiness. Relic didn't move. He simply shifted his weight, placing himself between Declan and the fallen tree, a living barrier with a calm that made the warning worse. "Okay," Declan murmured. Not as an order, more like a promise. "I see it." He crouched near the uprooted pine. Rain had washed away a layer of soil. Underneath, a hard curved edge caught the sun. Metal, rust-colored, deep and flaking, like dried blood on old armor. Declan brushed away wet leaves with the back of his glove. More metal appeared. A panel, a seam, the corner of something too straight to be natural. His throat tightened. Not fear, recognition. He pulled harder, clearing fern stems and moss. The storm had done the first half of the excavation for him, revealing what the forest had hidden for years. A semi-truck, an old American tractor trailer, the kind built to haul weight across long distances. Except this one looked like it had been abandoned by time itself. The entire body was corroded into a mottled orange-brown, heavy rust eating through paint in wide, peeling scars. Chrome still clung stubbornly to the massive grille in front, dulled and spotted, like a veteran refusing to fall completely apart. Small roof marker lights lined the top of the cab. The trailer stretched behind it, long and boxy, its side panels streaked with corrosion and rain-dark stains. The truck lay among northern pines as if it had grown there. Vines draped its edges, ferns pushing up around its wheels. The storm clouds had not entirely left the sky, and in the distance, faint thunder grumbled as if remembering how to speak. It didn't look like it had arrived here recently. It looked like it had been swallowed. Declan stood slowly. His muscles held a quiet tension he didn't name. Something in him wanted to laugh at how absurd it was, how cinematic, how impossible. Yet everything about it felt real, in the most uncomfortable way. Relic took one careful step forward, then stopped again. His ears angled toward the truck, his nose lifted, catching scent on the wet air. Declan watched the dog's posture, controlled but not curious. Relic wasn't investigating. He was refusing. "Not going near it," Declan said softly, as if the dog had argued aloud. Relic's eyes flicked up to him. Not pleading, not afraid. Just a look that said, "You already know." Declan approached the cab. The ground was slick with mud, but the truck's shape was unmistakable. An old world of highways and schedules, now sitting crooked in the silence of the forest like a secret too big to bury properly. He reached out and set his palm on the rusted door. The metal was cold. Cold in a way spring shouldn't allow. The texture bit into his skin through the glove, rough as sandpaper, flaky and fragile. His hand left a faint smear where rust dust clung to the fabric. And then, without warning, his memory did what it always did. It opened a door he kept locked. A corridor of concrete and metal. Fluorescent light that never felt warm. The smell of limestone and iron. A dog's breathing in his headset. Steady, disciplined. A moment of hesitation that felt too small to matter until it mattered forever. Declan's chest tightened. He forced himself to breathe. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Slow, measured. That was how you kept your hands steady. That was how you kept your voice calm when you were about to make a decision that would follow you for decades. He moved along the side of the truck, fingers tracing the ridges of corrosion, until he found what he hadn't wanted to find. A faint emblem, almost erased. A ghost of ink beneath rust and grime. A stylized marker, simple, understated, designed not to attract attention, sentinel. The word wasn't fully readable. Time and weather had nearly won. But Declan's mind filled it in like a reflex. His stomach dropped as if the forest floor had vanished. For a second, he was not 43 in the woods. He was younger, hardened, but still believing in the clean logic of orders. Still believing that if you followed procedure, the world would behave. Relic made a sound then. So small Declan almost missed it. Not a bark, not a growl. A single low exhale through the nose, sharp with warning. Declan looked down. Relic's paw had shifted, just slightly. And in that slight shift, Declan noticed something he hadn't noticed before. The dog wasn't standing in a random spot. He was standing on the edge of a shallow rut in the ground, half filled with rainwater. A track, not fresh enough to be obvious at first glance, not old enough to be part of last year's erosion. A subtle impression where mud had been compressed under weight. It ran parallel to the truck, then disappeared under new debris. Declan's heartbeat changed. He crouched and studied it carefully. The rut wasn't a tire track from the truck. It was too narrow. It looked like something small and heavy had been dragged, or rolled. Recently. The storm should have washed it away. But the storm had happened at night, which meant whatever made this track might have happened after the storm. Declan's mind moved the way it used to. Cold, fast, unwilling to lie to itself. Someone was here. Relic's gaze stayed locked on the truck, but his ears angled outward, scanning the forest behind them now. The dog wasn't just sensing the metal. He was sensing the possibility of people. And that, more than the truck, made Declan's skin prickle. This was the re-hook, the moment the forest stopped being beautiful and became watchful. Not because of a supernatural whisper, not because of ghosts, but because of something far more dangerous. Human intention. Declan swallowed, tasting rust in the back of his throat as if the air had changed. He didn't reach for his knife. He didn't dramatize it. He simply adjusted the strap of his pack, shifting weight for balance, and stepped back 2 paces. Relic didn't move. He remained between Declan and the truck like a silent command. Don't. Declan's mind flickered back to another dog, another stillness. Vargo. The name hit like a bruise pressed too hard. Vargo had been a German shepherd too. Younger then, strong, alert, loyal in the way only a working dog could be. Devotion made visible in posture. Vargo had stopped that day, just like Relic was stopping now. Had planted his paws at the threshold of a corridor, refusing to go forward. Not whining, not panicking, simply refusing. Declan remembered how he'd spoken into his radio with forced calm, the kind that sounded like certainty to everyone else. Proceed. And Vargo had obeyed, because dogs like that always obeyed. 12 minutes later, the world became smoke and stone. Declan's vision narrowed slightly. He blinked hard, grounding himself in the present. Wet leaves, bright air, Relic's steady breathing. The rusted truck in front of him, like a monument to the past's refusal to stay buried. He placed his hand again on the door of the cab. This time he didn't push. He didn't test it. He didn't try to prove he could control what was inside. He just rested his palm there and listened to the quiet. Somewhere deep in the trees, water dripped from a branch. A bird called once, then went silent. Relic's body remained rigid, but not frantic. His eyes were calm, almost disappointed, as if he had already seen the outcome of a choice Declan hadn't made yet. Declan exhaled slowly. "You're telling me something," he said to the dog, his voice barely above the forest's hush. Relic didn't look away from the truck. He didn't have to. Declan felt the memory of Vargo rise again, not as an image, but as a sound. A dog's bark cut short, a last warning swallowed by noise. Declan's hand trembled once, very slightly, then went still. He stepped away from the door, not retreating, not fleeing, choosing. Relic finally moved, one step backward, matching Declan, maintaining the same distance from the truck. The dog's body relaxed just enough to show approval, not back, and Relic didn't need him to. The back and Relic didn't need him to. The forest stayed bright, the air stayed clean, the sun remained gentle on the wet ferns. But Declan carried something heavier now, and it wasn't the pack on his shoulders. It was the certainty that the past had not been asleep. It had been waiting. And somewhere, beneath all that rust, beneath all that quiet, a decision he'd made 18 years ago had found a way to stand up again, right in front of him. Like a truck the forest couldn't fully bury, Declan did not sleep that night. He lay on the narrow cot in his cabin, staring at the ceiling beams, listening to the faint tick of cooling metal from the wood stove. The storm had passed completely, leaving behind a sky so clear it almost looked artificial. But clarity outside did not translate to clarity inside him. Relic lay near the door, not curled, not fully relaxed. The German shepherd's body was stretched along the floorboards, head lifted slightly, ears angling every few seconds as if adjusting invisible dials. Even at rest, he was on duty. Declan had not opened the trailer the day before. He had walked away. But walking away did not mean letting go. At first light, he was already pulling on his boots. The air outside was crisp and startlingly bright. Mist hovered over the lake behind the cabin, rising in quiet spirals. The forest looked untouched, innocent in its late spring glow. It was almost insulting. Declan adjusted the straps of his half-track pack and checked the contents automatically. Flashlight, gloves, compact pry bar, field notebook, canteen, no firearm. He had long ago stopped carrying one out here, unless absolutely necessary. He preferred to rely on awareness. Relic stood as soon as Declan stepped onto the porch. The dog's black and tan coat caught the sun in copper streaks. His tail was neutral, neither high nor low. He met Declan's gaze briefly, an unspoken question. "We're going back," Declan said quietly. Relic did not wag. He simply fell into step. The path to the old logging road felt shorter in daylight. Birds had returned to their routines. A red squirrel scolded them from a branch. Everything in the forest moved as if nothing had changed. But as they neared the fallen pine and the partially unearthed semi-truck, Relic's pace slowed. He did not freeze this time. He adjusted. His head lowered slightly, ears tilting back just enough to indicate caution rather than alarm. Declan stepped around the exposed roots and approached the rear of the trailer. Up close, the scale of it felt oppressive. The container was long and heavy, its panels blistered with deep rust. Entire sections of paint had peeled away in ragged layers, revealing dark, corroded metal beneath. The rear doors were chained, but the chain hung loose, recently disturbed. Declan's jaw tightened. He slipped on gloves and tested the latch. It gave with minimal resistance. The doors creaked open slowly, metal grinding against metal. The interior smelled like old steel and damp insulation. Sunlight pierced through a few holes in the roof, illuminating floating dust. Inside, the layout was not random. A heavy cylindrical housing lay secured against the wall, an energy core casing stripped of its primary fuel cell. It had been designed to hold something powerful and controlled. Its mounting bolts were clean compared to the surrounding rust. Not old. Removed recently. Nearby, rectangular modules were fixed to brackets. Geologic sensor units. Declan recognized the model from memory, though updated. Sentinel had once used early prototypes of similar devices to detect micro-seismic shifts beneath unstable terrain. At the far end of the trailer, a communications panel was mounted into a steel frame. Its wiring had been disconnected at one point, cut cleanly, not torn. But now, thin black cables ran from the panel down through a hole drilled in the trailer floor. Not haphazard. Deliberate. Declan crouched and ran his fingers over the edges of the drilled opening. The metal around it was newer, sharper. Someone had returned. Relic entered halfway into the trailer and then stopped, paws planted. His body stiffened, but not in fear. His ears angled downward. He wasn't listening for movement above. He was listening below. Declan felt it then. Not with his ears, but through his knees where they touched the metal floor. A faint vibration, subtle, rhythmic, too regular to be wind. Declan pressed his palm flat against the trailer floor. There it was. A low-frequency tremor, almost imperceptible, not natural. His heartbeat synchronized with it for a moment before his body rejected the rhythm. Relic stepped backward abruptly, exiting the trailer entirely. He stood outside, head turned toward the forest beyond the truck, not toward the container itself. Declan followed his line of sight. Several hundred meters away, barely visible through the trees, the land dipped slightly, a depression he had never paid attention to before. He closed the trailer doors slowly. "Stay," he murmured. Relic remained near the truck as Declan moved toward the dip in the ground. Ferns grew thick here, their leaves still heavy with rain. Moss-covered stones jutted from the soil. At first glance, it looked like any other uneven patch of forest floor. Then Declan noticed straight edges where there should have been curves. He knelt and brushed aside wet leaves. Concrete. Old, gray, cracked, but intact. A circular metal plate lay half-covered beneath a snarl of roots. A hatch. Declan exhaled slowly. The vibration was stronger here. He leaned closer and placed his ear against the concrete. There was no loud hum, no dramatic noise, just a steady, low resonance. As if something deep underground was clearing its throat, Relic suddenly moved, not toward Declan, but past him. The dog stepped directly over the concrete hatch and then, without warning, lay down on top of it. Not casually. He pressed his chest flat against the metal, and then he closed his eyes. Not in rest, in listening. Declan felt his own breath stall. Relic's entire body seemed tuned to something beneath the earth. The dog did not growl. He did not bark. He did not look at Declan. He simply absorbed the vibration. For a long second, the forest around them felt suspended. Sunlight frozen mid-air, birds silenced, even the breeze hesitant. Then Relic opened his eyes and stood. But he did not move away. He stood facing Declan now, as if waiting for him to decide. Declan swallowed hard. He had seen dogs detect explosives before humans could smell fuel. He had watched them sense tremors before instruments confirmed seismic shifts. But this felt different. This felt intentional. He slipped the pry bar from his pack and wedged it beneath the hatch's edge. The metal resisted at first, then shifted with a dull scrape. Cold air breathed upward. Not stale. Conditioned. Declan widened the gap enough to lift the hatch fully. A narrow concrete shaft descended with a metal ladder bolted to the wall. Dim emergency lights glowed below, weak but functional. That meant power, not residual, active. Declan hesitated only a fraction of a second before climbing down. The air grew cooler as he descended. The vibration became clearer, not louder, but more defined. At the bottom, a short corridor extended into a reinforced underground chamber. Declan stepped inside. The room was larger than he expected. Circular, concrete walls reinforced with steel ribs. Along one side stood racks of equipment. Updated seismic monitoring arrays, diagnostic panels, and what appeared to be a modern signal relay unit. This was not an abandoned relic. It was a system reactivated. A monitor screen flickered to life as Declan approached, triggered by motion. Data scrolled across it. Frequency graphs, depth readings, structural integrity models of surrounding bedrock. Declan scanned the numbers. The system was not just monitoring, it was calibrating. He moved closer to the central console. The interface was familiar in structure, though redesigned. He recognized the logic of the layout immediately. Sentinel. But not the version he had known. This one was refined, more precise, and connected. Declan traced the wiring with his eyes. The relay unit fed into a directional antenna, likely hidden somewhere above ground, concealed among trees or disguised as environmental equipment. Someone was receiving this data remotely. Relin descended quietly behind him and stopped just inside the chamber entrance. The dog's posture was alert but controlled. He did not approach the central console. He remained near the ladder, guarding the exit. Declan studied the readings more closely. The system was mapping underground cavities beneath the lake and ridge, testing structural stress points. Not a weapon. Not exactly. But if miscalibrated, even slightly, resonance amplification could destabilize weakened rock formations. If someone intended to push it further, to increase amplitude, the consequences could ripple outward. Not immediately catastrophic, but enough to trigger a controlled collapse. Declan's pulse slowed into the cold clarity he remembered from operations. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't nostalgia. This was a field test. Someone had revived Sentinel and improved it. Relic let out a soft exhale. Declan turned. The dog's gaze was fixed not on the equipment, but on the ceiling above them, the earth separating them from the forest. And for the first time, Declan realized something else. The vibration pattern had shifted, very slightly, as if responding to their presence. He reached out and touched the console's edge. The screen flickered again. A new line of data appeared. Remote handshake attempt. Declan's jaw tightened. Someone, somewhere, had just tried to access the system. Not hours ago. Now. Declan stepped back from the console. He did not disable anything yet. He did not shut it down. He simply stood there, breathing evenly, absorbing the reality. The past was no longer buried. It was networked. He looked at Relic. The dog did not look afraid. He looked steady, ready. Declan nodded once. "Okay," he said quietly. Not to the system, not to the forest, to himself. He turned off the screen manually, cutting the local display without severing power. The vibration continued, steady and restrained. They climbed back up into the sunlight. The forest greeted them, as if nothing beneath it had changed. But Declan knew better. Someone had reawakened Sentinel, and they were watching. He closed the hatch carefully and covered it again with leaves and branches, disguising it from casual sight. Relic stood beside him, body angled outward toward the trees. The late morning light felt warmer now, but not comforting. Declan rested a hand briefly on the dog's neck. This time, he had not ignored the warning. This time, he had listened. And that changed everything. The town of Blackridge did not change for anyone. It sat between pine-covered slopes and a narrow lake, like a place that had decided long ago to remain exactly as it was. One grocery store, one diner, one hardware supply shop with a faded sign that creaked in wind. Even the sheriff's office looked less like law enforcement and more like a municipal afterthought. Brick walls bleached by decades of sun. A flag that had been replaced often, but never proudly. Declan parked his old pickup in front of the building just before noon. Relic remained seated in the passenger seat, posture upright, but calm. The dog did not whine. He did not shift. His amber-brown eyes followed movement across the street. An elderly man loading lumber into a truck, a woman pushing a stroller. Declan stepped out and adjusted the collar of his olive field jacket. He moved like someone accustomed to being observed, even when he wasn't. Inside the sheriff's office, the air smelled faintly of paper and old coffee. Sheriff Marlowe Keegan stood behind a desk near the back wall, reading over a file. He was 52, tall and broad, but softened by age in ways that made him look steady rather than imposing. His hair, once dark, had gone mostly gray at the temples. A trimmed mustache lined his upper lip, neatly kept, deliberate. His eyes were a practical brown, eyes that weighed before reacting. He wore a standard sheriff's uniform. Tan shirt, dark trousers, badge polished but not ostentatious. An old leather jacket hung over the back of his chair. Keegan carried himself with the posture of a man who had grown up in this county, who had watched it change slowly and who had no patience for drama. When he looked up and saw Declan, his expression did not warm. It evaluated. "Boss," Keegan said evenly, "didn't expect to see you in town." Declan nodded once. "Didn't expect to come." Keegan gestured toward a chair. "What's wrong?" Declan didn't sit immediately. He rarely did when he could stand. Instead, he placed both hands lightly on the back of the chair and said, "There's something in the forest near the old logging road." Keegan's eyes narrowed slightly. Define something. A semi-truck. Military origin. Old. But not abandoned. That got Keegan's attention. He leaned back slowly. "We talking scrap metal?" "No." Keegan studied Declan for several seconds. He knew about Declan's past. In the broadest way, small towns knew such things. Knew he had been in special operations. Knew he'd come back different. Knew he kept mostly to himself, polite but distant. There had been rumors, of course. There always were. "You're sure?" Keegan asked. Declan held his gaze. "Yes." Keegan exhaled through his nose. "And you're bringing this to me because if I ignore it, I won't sleep." That answer landed harder than the specifics. Keegan stood. He took his jacket from the chair and slipped it on. "Show me." Relic remained outside until Declan opened the truck door. When Keegan stepped out beside them at the edge of the logging road, he paused. Relic stood tall but still. His coat gleamed under the midday sun. His ears tracked Keegan's approach, but his body remained controlled. There was no aggression, only assessment. "That's the shepherd?" Keegan asked quietly. Declan nodded. "Relic." Keegan studied the dog carefully. Relic's muzzle carried faint silver now. His eyes were steady and intelligent, reading Keegan the same way he read terrain. "Looks like he's seen things," Keegan muttered. "He has." They walked together toward the truck. When the semi-truck came into full view, Keegan stopped dead in his tracks. The rusted cab loomed between trees like something dredged from memory. Sunlight caught on the corroded chrome grille. Vines clung to the trailer's sides. It looked abandoned, but not harmless. Jesus, Keegan breathed. He circled the vehicle, slowly, boots crunching on gravel and wet twigs. He ran a hand across the rusted paneling and shook his head. "This hasn't been reported," he said. "No theft notices, no missing transport calls, nothing." Declan didn't reply. Keegan turned toward him. "You go inside?" "Yes." "And?" Declan hesitated just long enough to make Keegan's jaw tighten. "There's equipment in there. Geological monitoring hardware. It's active." Keegan stared at him. "Active?" "Yes." Keegan let out a humorless breath. "You're telling me there's functioning underground equipment hooked to this relic and nobody thought to mention it to county law enforcement?" "I'm telling you someone doesn't want it mentioned." Keegan studied him again. Then something shifted in the sheriff's expression. Not fear, but discomfort. "You said military origin?" "Yes." Keegan rubbed the back of his neck. "Funny thing," he said slowly. "A man came through town yesterday asking about access roads out that way." Declan's gaze sharpened. "What man?" "Tall. Lean build, early 40s, dark hair, no beard. Spoke like he'd done boardrooms and briefings for a living. Not from here." Declan felt his pulse change. "What did he say?" "He asked if any infrastructure upgrades had been done near the logging trails. Claimed he was doing environmental survey work." Keegan paused. "Didn't look like a surveyor." Declan didn't need more. "Where is he?" Keegan hesitated. "Staying at the Lakeshore Inn." The Lakeshore Inn was the kind of place that tried to look modern without ever quite managing it. Beige siding, a reception desk that smelled of lemon cleaner. Framed prints of local landscapes hung on the walls, slightly crooked. The receptionist was a woman in her late 20s named Clara McBride. Short, freckled, with dark auburn hair pulled into a low bun. She had the careful politeness of someone who'd grown up here and learned not to ask too many questions. Her eyes flicked from Declan to Relic to Keegan in quick succession. "You're looking for Mr. Vale," Clara said softly. "Room 12. Declan felt the name settle into him like a weight. Adrian Vale. He hadn't heard it spoken aloud in nearly 2 decades. Keegan knocked once on Room 12's door. It opened almost immediately. Adrian Vale stood framed in the doorway. He was slightly taller than Declan remembered, or perhaps simply leaner in a way that accentuated height. His dark hair was neatly trimmed, no gray visible. His face was clean-shaven, sharp cheekbones and an angular jaw giving him a controlled, professional appearance. His eyes were cool gray, less weathered than Declan's, but not naive. He wore a fitted charcoal technical jacket over a neutral sweater, dark trousers, clean hiking boots that looked new. He did not look like a man who belonged in the forest. He looked like a man who had arrived with intention. His gaze moved first to Keegan, then to Declan, and finally to Relic. Recognition flickered in his eyes, not surprise, expectation. "Declan," Adrian said calmly. He did not use Voss. He used the first name from a life that no longer existed. Keegan stepped slightly forward. "You know each other?" Adrian's lips curved faintly. "We worked together once." Declan's voice was flat. "You shouldn't be here." Adrian did not react defensively. "I could say the same," he replied. Relic stepped forward 1 pace. A low sound emerged from his throat, not loud, but unmistakable. It was not directed at Keegan. It was directed at Adrian. Adrian's eyes shifted to the dog. "That's not Vargo," he said. The name hit like a hammer to bone. Declan's face did not move, but something tightened behind his eyes. No, he said. It's not. Keegan glanced between them, tension rising. What's this about? He demanded. Adrian answered before Declan could. Sentinel, he said simply. Keegan blinked. What the hell is Sentinel? Adrian stepped out of the doorway, folding his arms loosely. It was a seismic detection project, he explained, designed to predict structural collapses in unstable terrain. He looked at Declan. It didn't fail. Declan's voice dropped lower. It buried people. Adrian's expression remained composed. It was shut down because of optics, he said. Politics, funding optics. The technology was viable. The cost wasn't, Declan shot back. Adrian's eyes sharpened. Cost is relative, he said. If perfected, it could prevent landslides, mine collapses, earthquake casualties. No one deserves to die for a prototype, Declan said. Adrian held his gaze. If it saves thousands later, how do you quantify that? Silence stretched. Relic's growl deepened slightly, not explosive, but resolute. And then Adrian's calm expression faltered, not because of Declan's words, because Relic stepped directly between them. Not aggressively, not lunging. He simply positioned his body as a barrier, chest lifted, head level. And then he did something unexpected. He turned his back on Adrian. Completely. As if Adrian did not warrant direct threat. As if the danger lay somewhere else. For 1 second, Adrian's composure cracked. His eyes flicked, not to the dog, but toward the tree line beyond the parking lot. Just for a fraction. Declan saw it. That glance. That almost invisible check. Someone else was involved. Adrian recovered instantly. You're reacting emotionally, he said evenly. You always did. Declan did not answer, because he no longer needed to. He had seen what mattered. Adrian wasn't alone in this. He turned to Keegan. You wanted proof, Declan said quietly. You just saw it. Keegan's expression had hardened. Mr. Vale, the sheriff said firmly, I think we're going to have a longer conversation. Adrian nodded once, unthreatened. I'm not hiding, he said. I'm improving something that was ahead of its time. Declan stepped back. Relic stayed close to his leg now, body aligned outward. Watching. Not Adrian. The trees, the parking lot, the spaces between. Declan felt it settle into him with cold clarity. This wasn't about reopening an old wound. It was about someone trying to finish what had started 18 years ago. And this time, the system wasn't isolated. It was connected and monitored. Declan met Adrian's eyes one last time. You still believe the numbers matter more than people, he said quietly. Adrian's expression did not change. I believe prevention matters. Declan nodded once. Not at any cost. He turned and walked away. Relic followed without hesitation. Behind him, he could feel Adrian watching, measuring, calculating. The sun outside was bright again, almost painfully so. But Declan knew something had shifted. The forest was no longer the only thing listening. The lake looked harmless in late afternoon light. From the ridge above it, the surface reflected the sky in pale blue glass, only disturbed by drifting pollen and the occasional ripple from a fish breaking tension. The surrounding forest shimmered in warm gold. It was the kind of view real estate agents described with words like peaceful and untouched. Declan knew better. He stood at the edge of the slope, overlooking the water, boots planted in damp earth, arms folded loosely across his chest. The wind had shifted slightly since morning, carrying a mineral scent from below, faint, metallic, almost electric. Relic stood a few paces ahead of him. The German shepherd's body was still but not relaxed. His ears angled independently, one forward, one back. His gaze was fixed not on the lake itself, but on the narrow strip of shoreline where limestone outcroppings cut through soil like pale scars. Declan crouched and studied the ground. There, a thin fracture line in the dirt, not dramatic, not wide, just enough to suggest tension beneath. He pressed 2 fingers into it. The soil crumbled too easily. He looked toward the water again. The lake rested atop a limestone basin riddled with natural cavities, karst formations that could shift if resonance traveled through the right channels. He had seen similar geological weaknesses in operational briefings years ago. Places where vibration didn't just move Earth, it amplified it. Behind him, boots crunched against gravel. "Thought I'd find you here." Declan didn't turn immediately. He recognized the voice. Sheriff Marlowe Keegan approached slowly, hands hooked loosely at his belt. He had left the uniform shirt unbuttoned at the collar now, jacket off, sleeves rolled to mid-forearm. The late day's sun caught the gray in his hair, softening him in a way that didn't match the tension in his posture. "I ran the property maps," Keegan said. "This whole slope?" "County land. No permits for drilling, no authorized monitoring stations." Declan nodded. "It's not county," he said quietly. Keegan frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means the funding's private." Relic shifted slightly, moving downhill a few steps. He lowered his head toward the shoreline and paused, nostrils flaring. The wind carried something new. Not oil, not fuel, ozone. Declan stood slowly. "Feel that?" he asked. Keegan blinked. "Feel what?" Declan held up a hand. A subtle tremor passed through the soles of his boots, not sharp enough to register as a quake. Just a faint, continuous hum. Keegan stiffened. "Is that—" "Yes." They both looked toward the lake again. The water seemed unchanged. But the air had grown strangely still. Relic took another step forward and then stopped abruptly. He did not bark. He did not growl. He planted himself before the narrow crack in the soil and refused to move. Declan's pulse slowed into operational rhythm. "How often?" Keegan asked. Declan exhaled slowly. "Probably testing amplitude thresholds, incremental increases." Keegan's jaw tightened. "You're saying this is deliberate?" "Yes." The sheriff stared at the lake, at the reflection of sky so calm it felt mocking. "Can it collapse?" Declan considered the slope, the fracture lines, the geology beneath. "If they push it too far," he said evenly, "the resonance could trigger a shelf break. Not the whole mountain, but enough." "And the lake?" Declan's eyes didn't leave the water. "The displacement could send a surge downstream." Blackridge sat in the valley beyond the southern bend. Keegan's face hardened. "You're telling me my town could get washed out because someone's running an experiment?" Declan didn't answer, because the answer was yes. They descended toward the shoreline. The closer they came to the water, the more noticeable the vibration became. Not loud, not violent, but consistent. Relic's movements changed subtly. His shoulders tightened. His tail lowered slightly. Not fear, but calculation. Declan crouched near the limestone edge and placed his palm flat against the rock. The vibration was clearer here. A low, almost musical frequency. He closed his eyes. For a brief second, memory intruded. Not with images, but sensation. Concrete walls, headset static, a voice counting down. He opened his eyes quickly. Not now, not here. Keegan took a step back from the shoreline. "What do we do?" the sheriff asked quietly. Declan didn't answer immediately. He was watching Relic. The dog shifted sideways and then, unexpectedly, pawed at the water's edge. Not aggressively, just once. The lake responded with a thin ripple. Declan frowned. Relic pawed again. The ripple expanded outward, then intersected with a second, unnatural ripple coming from deeper within the lake. Not wind, not fish. A pulse. Declan's eyes sharpened. "They're pushing signal through the basin," he murmured. Keegan stared at him. "How the hell do you know that?" Declan didn't explain that he had spent years reading seismic models and training simulations. That certain patterns imprinted themselves permanently on the mind. Instead, he said, "Because it's patterned." The pulses weren't random. They were timed. Suddenly, a flock of starlings burst from the tree line to their right. Not gradually, explosively. Dozens of birds shot upward in chaotic spirals, shrieking sharply before scattering toward the horizon. Relic reacted instantly, not chasing, not startled, but snapping his head toward the forest behind them. His body stiffened in a new direction, not toward the lake, toward the trees. Declan turned slowly. Between two trunks on the ridge above, something metallic caught the sunlight, just a flicker. Gone in an instant. Declan's chest tightened. They were not alone. Not observing from a distance. Close. He did not speak. He did not move abruptly. He simply shifted his stance, placing himself between Relic and the open slope. Keegan followed his gaze. "You see something?" the sheriff asked quietly. Declan nodded once. Keegan's hand rested near his holster, but he didn't draw. The forest fell silent again. No birds, no breeze, just the low hum beneath the earth. After a long second, the vibration pattern shifted slightly. Lower amplitude. As if whoever was monitoring had noticed something too. Relic did not relax. He stared at the ridge, unblinking. Declan understood the message without words. This was no longer a test in isolation. They were being watched in real time. Keegan stepped closer. "You think Vale's got people up there?" Declan didn't look away from the trees. "I think Vale doesn't operate alone." Keegan exhaled sharply. "You have proof?" "No." "Then we're walking into speculation." Declan finally turned toward him. "No," he said calmly. "We're walking into math." He gestured toward the lake. "Every system has a tolerance. Push it past that, and it doesn't just fail. It cascades." Keegan looked at the water again. "And you're sure they're testing limits?" "Yes." Relic finally moved, but not away from the crack. He stepped directly over it and stood facing downhill toward the lake. A silent line drawn between fracture and water. Declan studied the slope carefully. Hairline cracks extended further than he had first seen. Nothing catastrophic yet, but new. Very new. Keegan ran a hand over his mouth. "Let's say you're right," he said. "Let's say this thing can destabilize the slope." "What's the endgame?" he continued. "Mining? Insurance fraud? What?" Declan shook his head slightly. "Validation." Keegan frowned. "Vale doesn't want to destroy anything," Declan said quietly. "He wants to prove it works." "By risking collapse?" "By demonstrating controlled resonance." Keegan stared at him in disbelief. "That's insane." "No," Declan said softly. "It's calculated." He looked down at Relic. The dog's breathing was steady, but deeper now. Muscles taut. Declan knelt beside him and placed a hand lightly on the back of his neck. Relic did not break eye contact with the slope. "You feel it changing," Declan murmured. Relic's ears twitched once. Agreement. The vibration pattern eased further, gradually, then stopped. Not abruptly, intentionally. Keegan blinked. It's shut off. Declan nodded. They're adjusting. The forest noise returned slowly. First insects, then distant bird calls. The lake surface settled completely. But the cracks in the soil remained, proof of strain. Keegan stood in silence for a long moment. Then, he said, I'll file an inquiry. Environmental hazard review. Buy us time. Declan rose. They'll anticipate that. Then, what do you suggest? Declan looked once more at the ridge where he had seen the flicker of metal. We need to understand what they're measuring. And how? Declan's expression hardened. Not angry, not afraid. Focused. I go back underground. Keegan studied him carefully. You sure you want to reopen that door? Declan's jaw flexed once. It's already open. Relic finally turned his head slightly toward Declan. Not questioning. Ready. The late sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the water. The lake returned to calm. But Declan knew the calm was conditional. He rested his hand on Relic's shoulder. This wasn't about nostalgia or regret. It was about containment. If Sentinel continued to escalate, the land itself would become collateral, and Declan would not let the ground under Blackridge turn into another calculation. They began the slow walk back up the slope. Behind them, the water reflected the sky perfectly again. As if nothing beneath it had ever moved, night came quietly to Blackridge. Not dramatic, not cinematic. Just the gradual dimming of sky until the forest became layered in shadow. The lake below Declan's cabin turned from blue to slate, then to black glass that reflected nothing. Inside the cabin, a single lamp cast warm light across rough wooden walls. The field jacket hung over a chair. Boots sat by the door. The old military watch rested beside a folded map on the table. Declan sat alone. Relic lay near the hearth, head on paws but eyes open. The German shepherd's ears shifted occasionally, tracking distant sounds beyond the cabin walls. Even resting, he never truly powered down. Declan held a small metal object in his hand, a collar tag, worn smooth at the edges. The engraving had faded over the years, but one word remained readable: Vargo. He hadn't taken it out in a long time. His reflection in the window looked older tonight. The short, dark hair at his temples carried more gray than he remembered. His beard shadow caught the lamplight, emphasizing the hard line of his jaw. But it wasn't age that weighed on him. It was arithmetic. 12 minutes. That was how long it had taken from the moment he gave the order to the moment the tunnel collapsed. He remembered the sound first, not the explosion, the silence before it. Vargo had stopped in the corridor, front paws planted, body rigid, ears forward. Declan had spoken into his headset with calm authority. Proceed. The dog had obeyed. That was the contract, and contracts didn't account for instinct. Declan closed his eyes now and let the memory surface fully. Concrete walls damp with condensation, the hum of equipment warming up, Adrian's voice in his earpiece, steady, confident, explaining resonance thresholds. We're well within safe parameters. Declan had believed him, because the numbers said so. 12 minutes later, the ceiling came down. He remembered dust choking his lungs, the weight of debris, the sound of someone shouting his name. And somewhere beneath the noise, Vargo's bark. Cut short. Declan's grip tightened around the tag until his knuckles whitened. Relic rose quietly and walked over to him. The dog placed his chin against Declan's knee. not seeking comfort, offering presence. Declan exhaled slowly and lowered his hand, resting it against the shepherd's neck. "You weren't there," he murmured. Relic's amber eyes met his, steady, unjudging. Declan swallowed hard. "No," he corrected himself. "But you are now." The next morning, he didn't wait for sunlight. He moved before dawn, the forest still wrapped in blue shadow. Relic followed without command. They reached the concealed hatch as mist clung low to the ground. The air felt heavier than before, not physically, but charged. Declan removed the natural camouflage he'd placed the day prior and lifted the hatch carefully. The ladder descended into faint artificial light. The system was still active. He climbed down. Relic followed. Inside the chamber, the equipment hummed at a slightly higher pitch than before. The central console displayed updated data streams, seismic readings recalibrated overnight. Declan stepped closer. Frequency amplitude had increased by 0.7%. Minimal on paper, significant in effect. He navigated the interface, fingers moving with memory-driven familiarity. The layout had changed, but the architecture remained recognizable. Sentinel was in test mode. A diagnostic window indicated remote input. Active. Declan leaned closer. The waveform visualization scrolled across the screen, smooth oscillations building gradually. He could almost hear Adrian's voice again. "Precision requires iteration." Declan's jaw tightened. Footsteps echoed faintly above. Not random forest movement, deliberate. Relic turned toward the ladder. His body stiffened, but he did not bark. Declan shut off the monitor and stepped back into shadow near the wall. A figure descended, Adrian Vale. He wore the same charcoal jacket, but his sleeves were rolled slightly, revealing forearms lean and sinewed. He moved carefully, but without fear. His expression was focused, analytical, like a surgeon entering an operating room. He paused when he saw Declan. I assumed you'd come back," Adrian said calmly. Declan did not step forward. "You're pushing amplitude." "Incrementally," Adrian replied, "with intolerance." Declan's eyes flicked toward the console. "The slope above the lake isn't uniform," he said. "You're amplifying stress fractures." Adrian tilted his head slightly. "You're extrapolating from incomplete data." Declan's voice dropped. "I'm extrapolating from experience." Adrian approached the console and adjusted a setting with precise, confident movements. "The previous failure," Adrian said evenly, "was not due to resonance miscalculation." Declan's gaze sharpened. "It was due to an uncharted cavity in the limestone." Adrian's fingers paused briefly over the controls. "That cave-in wasn't my fault." Relic let out a low, warning growl. Not loud, but deliberate. Adrian glanced down at the dog. "You've replaced him," he said softly. Declan's expression hardened. "No," he replied. "I haven't." Without warning, the overhead lights flickered. Not because of a power surge, because the waveform on the central screen spiked sharply. Both men turned at the same time. The graph showed a brief anomaly, an unexpected resonance peak, not caused by Adrian's input. Relic reacted instantly. He moved past both men and positioned himself directly between the console and the center of the chamber floor. Then he barked. Once, sharp, authoritative. The sound reverberated off concrete walls like a warning shot. Adrian's composure cracked for a fraction of a second. "What did you just trigger?" Declan demanded. "I didn't." The waveform stabilized almost immediately, but the spike remained logged. Declan stepped closer to the display. The anomaly originated from outside the test grid. A second signal. Someone else was interacting with the system. Not through Adrian's console. Remote. Adrian's eyes narrowed. "That's not possible," he muttered. Declan looked at him carefully. "You're not alone in this." Adrian didn't answer. And in that silence, Declan saw something new. Uncertainty. The vibration in the floor strengthened slightly. Relic did not retreat. He held position, body angled toward the chamber's central axis, ears tracking minute changes in frequency. Declan moved beside him. "You're running a live test while someone else is piggybacking your system," he said quietly to Adrian. Adrian's jaw flexed. "I control the core," he replied. "Do you?" Declan asked. The two men stood inches apart, the console casting pale light across their faces. "You think shutting it down is the solution?" Adrian said sharply. "That's fear talking." "No," Declan said evenly. "It's memory." Adrian's eyes flashed. "Memory distorts. Not when it buries people." Silence fell again. The vibration eased gradually. The system returned to baseline. Adrian exhaled slowly. "We can refine this," he said. "Eliminate the instability." Declan looked at the console, then at Relic. The shepherd's breathing had steadied, but his posture remained guarded. Declan remembered Vargo in the corridor, standing still, waiting. He had ignored that pause once. He would not ignore it again. "This isn't about refining," Declan said quietly. "It's about knowing when to stop." Adrian met his gaze. "If we stop every time something spikes, we never advance." Declan shook his head slightly. "If you push every time something resists, you collapse." The air between them felt tight, charged with more than vibration. Adrian stepped back first. He powered down the active calibration manually. The hum in the chamber faded to a minimal diagnostic idle. Relic relaxed slightly, but did not lie down. Adrian turned to Declan. "I'm not trying to destroy Blackridge." "I know," Declan replied. "That's what makes this dangerous." Adrian's lips pressed into a thin line. "You always were sentimental about variables you couldn't quantify." Declan didn't respond. He rested his hand briefly against Relic's shoulder. The shepherd leaned into it subtly, not weak, anchored. Declan looked at Adrian one last time. "You get one more test," he said quietly. "If I see amplitude cross safe threshold again, I shut it down." Adrian studied him. "You don't have that authority." Declan's eyes hardened. "I don't need it." The message was clear. He would act regardless. Adrian did not argue further. Instead, he stepped aside. Declan ascended the ladder with Relic at his side. When they emerged into morning light, the forest felt different. Not calm, alert. Declan paused at the hatch and looked back down once more. This was not redemption, not yet. But it was recognition. He had chosen to listen, and the next time the ground spoke, he would not silence it. He closed the hatch carefully. Behind him, Relic stood steady, waiting. The air inside the chamber felt thinner than it had the day before. Not physically, psychologically. Declan descended the ladder without hesitation, boots striking the metal rungs in slow, measured rhythm. Relic followed directly behind him, shoulders tight, paws landing with silent precision. The chamber lights were already on. Adrian stood at the central console. He had removed his charcoal jacket and folded it neatly over the back of a chair, sleeves of his neutral gray sweater pushed up to his elbows. Without the outer layer, he looked leaner, almost fragile. But the sharpness of his posture betrayed nothing soft. His hair, neatly combed, had begun to fall slightly out of place. not from chaos, from intensity. "You're early," Adrian said without turning. "You started without me," Declan replied evenly. The low hum in the chamber was deeper now, not just a diagnostic idle, active resonance. Declan stepped forward, eyes locking onto the central display. Sentinel was no longer in calibration mode. It was in sequence build. "Full activation?" he asked quietly. Adrian nodded. "Scaled," he corrected. "Controlled." Declan glanced at the waveform, amplitude rising steadily. "You said one more test." "This is the last test," Adrian said. Relic moved past Declan and positioned himself directly in front of the console. He did not growl, he did not bark. He simply stood there, blocking. Adrian looked down at the German Shepherd. "He senses tension," Adrian muttered. "No," Declan said softly. "He senses patterns." The hum intensified slightly. Declan stepped beside the dog and studied the screen. A probability algorithm was running in the corner of the display, projected structural tolerance outcome, 78%. He stared at the number. Adrian followed his gaze. 78% success probability, Adrian said calmly. Higher than acceptable industry thresholds. Declan's jaw tightened. 18 years ago, said slowly, the number was 81. Adrian's fingers hovered over the activation toggle. That collapse was due to environmental anomaly. It was due to arrogance, Declan replied. Relic's ears twitched sharply. The hum shifted again, deeper, heavier. Adrian inhaled. This system, fully stabilized, can predict structural failure before it happens. Entire communities could be protected. Declan kept his eyes on the number. 78. 22% risk. 22% of a mountain. 22% of a town. 22% of a life. He remembered dust filling his lungs. He remembered silence after the barking stopped. You don't gamble with geology, Declan said quietly. You refine it. Adrian pressed a key. The sequence advanced. The chamber vibrated subtly beneath their boots. Relic stepped closer to the console and planted himself again, squarely between Adrian and the control panel. Adrian frowned. Move him. Declan didn't. Not until you pause the sequence. The vibration deepened. Adrian's voice sharpened slightly. You're letting emotion override reason. No, Declan said. I'm letting consequence override projection. The probability number ticked upward briefly. 79%. Adrian's eyes flashed triumph. See? Declan didn't answer, because the secondary stress map had shifted. Hairline fractures expanded in simulation along the lake basin. Your variable correction isn't accounting for subsurface water pressure, Declan said quickly. Adrian adjusted parameters. Compensating. The probability dipped. 77%. Adrian's expression tightened. Instability is expected during ramp. Relic's breathing grew heavier. The vibration rose another notch. Concrete dust trickled from the ceiling seam above. Declan looked up. That wasn't simulation. That was real. Without warning, the lights dimmed slightly. Not flicker, not failure, but strain. The waveform on screen jumped erratically. Not a clean curve. Jagged. The algorithm recalculated. 76%, 75%, 74%. Adrian's face drained of color. That's impossible, he whispered. The system had just recalculated live geological stress feedback from outside the test chamber. Real Earth response, not projected. Relic suddenly barked once, sharp and commanding, and lunged forward, placing both paws against the lower console panel. Not attacking, blocking. The entire floor tremored, not violently, but unmistakably. A distant crack echoed through the tunnel walls. Declan didn't hesitate. He grabbed Adrian by the collar and yanked him backward. "Kill it!" he shouted. "I can stabilize now!" Adrian reached for the override key. The system responded with a warning tone. Core overload. Resonance feedback loop. The amplitude spiked beyond safe calibration. Declan shoved Adrian aside and slammed his palm against the emergency safety access pad. The console demanded a code. He stared at it. The number 78 flickered again on the probability window, distorted. He entered the override code for a split second. Nothing happened. Then, the central resonance column emitted a piercing metallic shriek. The vibration surged violently through the floor. A section of ceiling cracked above them. Declan tackled Adrian to the ground just as a chunk of concrete slammed into the console, shattering screens and sending sparks across the chamber. Relic leapt backward instinctively, but did not flee. The hum fractured into chaotic noise, then stopped. Total silence. Dust filled the air. Declan coughed, rolling off Adrian and pushing himself to his knees. "Move!" he barked. The tunnel entrance trembled again. Secondary collapse. Small debris rained down. Relic sprinted toward the ladder and looked back once. Declan hauled Adrian upright and forced him toward the exit. They climbed as the chamber groaned beneath them. Halfway up, a final crack split through the control room. Below, the central resonance column collapsed inward with a grinding roar. They reached the surface seconds before the hatch area shifted slightly beneath their boots. Not catastrophic. Contained. The system had destroyed itself internally. Declan turned and looked down at the sealed hatch. Dust drifted into morning light. Adrian staggered back a few steps, breathing hard. "You sabotaged it," he rasped. Declan shook his head. "It sabotaged itself." Adrian stared at the ground. 78%, he muttered. Declan's voice was steady. 22%. Adrian's shoulders slumped slightly. Not defeated, but shaken. Relic stood between them, still, watchful. The forest around them remained intact. No landslide, no water surge, no collapsing ridge. Just quiet wind through trees. Declan looked toward the distant lake, unbroken. He exhaled slowly. Sentinel was gone, not powered down, destroyed. Adrian wiped dust from his face, eyes unfocused. "You just erased 18 years of research." Declan looked at him calmly. "No," he said. "I erased a repeat." Adrian didn't respond. For the first time since Declan had known him, there was no calculation behind his eyes. Only something uncertain. They stood in silence for a long moment. Relic relaxed slightly, tension draining from his posture. The ground beneath their boots felt steady, solid. Declan placed a hand on the shepherd's shoulder. "You stopped before I did," he murmured quietly. Relic blinked once. The wind shifted through the trees again, carrying nothing metallic now. No hum, no resonance. Just forest. Adrian looked at the sealed earth where the hatch had been. "It could have worked," he said quietly. Declan didn't argue. "Maybe," he replied, "but not like that." Adrian said nothing further. He turned and walked slowly back toward the tree line. Declan watched him go. Not as an enemy, not as an ally, just as a man who had believed too deeply in projection. Relic stepped closer to Declan. The dog leaned lightly against his leg, not seeking reassurance, grounding him. Declan looked up at the sky, filtering through pine branches. 18 years ago, he had trusted numbers over instinct. Today, he had trusted the pause. The earth had responded. And this time, no one was buried beneath it. He picked up his jacket from where he'd set it near the tree line. Relic fell into step beside him. Behind them, the forest stood untouched. Sentinel was finished. The mountain remained. Morning arrived without ceremony. No sirens, no tremors, no distant mechanical hum beneath the earth. Sunlight filtered through tall northern pines in clean, pale beams, touching the lake with gentle silver. The water lay perfectly still, its surface unbroken except for the faint rings left by early insects skimming across it. Blackridge woke the way small towns always did, slowly and without spectacle. Declan sat on the rough wooden steps outside his cabin. The field jacket hung open over his red and blue plaid shirt. His cargo pants were still dust-stained from the collapse, boots scuffed with gray residue from the tunnel. He hadn't bothered to clean them yet. Relic moved from the yard to sit beside him. The German shepherd was 8 years old, mature, steady, past the reckless phase of youth. His black and tan coat caught the light in muted contrast, thick but short, built for work rather than show. A faint silvering had begun around his muzzle, barely noticeable unless someone looked closely. Declan noticed. Relic lowered himself slowly and placed his head across Declan's knee, not seeking affection, anchoring him. Declan rested his hand behind the dog's ear, fingers pressing lightly into the warm fur. The shepherd's breathing was deep, even. His eyes were half closed but alert beneath the surface. There was no vibration in the ground now, no hum in the bones of the mountain, only wind through pine needles. Declan exhaled slowly. The silence felt heavier than noise. He had grown accustomed to listening for threat, to measuring the environment for instability, to anticipating the next spike, the next calculation. Now, there was nothing to measure. Sentinel was gone. The hatch sealed under collapsed stone, the console buried, the resonance core destroyed. No data streams, no probabilities, just air. He let that settle into him. From down the gravel path, Sheriff Marlowe Keegan approached. The sheriff walked without urgency today. His uniform shirt was crisp, but the lines around his eyes were deeper than usual. 52 years old, broad-shouldered but thickened slightly with age, Keegan carried himself like a man who had seen too many reports and not enough resolution. He stopped a few feet away. "It's quiet," Keegan said. Declan nodded once. "Yeah." Keegan glanced toward the lake. "Survey team's coming in tomorrow. I told them we had structural instability from an old mining shaft." Declan raised an eyebrow slightly. "Technically not untrue," Keegan added dryly. Relic lifted his head briefly, studying Keegan with calm appraisal, then rested again. Keegan exhaled. "Vale's gone," he said. Declan didn't look surprised. "Left at dawn, packed clean, no warrants to hold him on." "Figures." Keegan shifted his weight. "He didn't try to defend himself," the sheriff added. "Just said some projects need better timing." Declan's jaw flexed slightly. He still believes in it. Then he turned and walked back toward 12 o'clock. Then he turned and walked back toward town. No handshakes, no ceremony, just acknowledgement. Declan remained seated. Relic shifted and adjusted his weight slightly, pressing closer. "You stayed," Declan murmured quietly. The dog's ear twitched. Declan looked out over the lake again. For a moment, memory tried to intrude, not as trauma, but as echo. Concrete dust, probability percentages, the sharp bark that cut through noise. He let it pass. Instead, he looked at the present. The slope above the lake showed no fresh fractures. The tree line stood intact. Birdsong returned in soft waves. The earth had absorbed the shock. So had he. A sudden gust moved through the trees. Not strong, but deliberate. It stirred the pine branches above the cabin, and something small fell from the eaves beside the door. Declan stood and walked over. It was an old nail, rusted, curved slightly, likely shaken loose from the cabin roof by the vibration the day before. He picked it up and turned it between his fingers. Metal fatigue, stress under pressure, failure when pushed past tolerance. Relic stepped closer and sniffed the air. Not the nail, but the wind itself. He lifted his head and stared toward the ridge for a long, quiet moment. Not tense, not alarmed, just aware. Declan followed the dog's gaze. Nothing moved there. No metal flicker, no hidden presence, only sunlight filtering through green. Relic lowered his head again and relaxed. The message wasn't about danger, it was about awareness. Declan understood. The mountain hadn't spoken in vibration this time. It had spoken in pause, in what didn't happen. He placed the nail on the porch railing instead of discarding it. A reminder, not of collapse, but of limit. Later that afternoon, a truck passed slowly on the road leading out of town. Declan didn't see it, but he heard the distant engine tone shift as it moved through the valley. Adrian Vale was leaving Blackridge without arrest, without headline, without dramatic consequence. Just a man walking away with a belief intact. Declan didn't resent that. He had once believed in numbers with similar conviction. The difference was not intelligence, it was interruption. 18 years ago, he had overridden instinct in favor of algorithm. Yesterday, he had reversed that equation. Relic shifted again and lifted his head. His amber eyes met Declan's, steady, grounded. Declan let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding for years. "I heard you," he said quietly. Relic didn't respond. The statement wasn't meant for him. It was meant for a corridor 18 years gone. For a pause ignored. For a bark cut short. Declan's throat tightened briefly, but he didn't look away from the lake. "I heard you," he repeated, softer. The forest answered with wind through pine, nothing else. As evening approached, the sunlight thinned to amber. Declan remained seated on the steps. Relic leaned fully against his leg now, relaxed for the first time in days. The shepherd's breathing slowed into restful rhythm. The mountain stood silent. The lake reflected sky. No sensors tracked probability. No screens calculated success rates. The world had returned to analog, and in that simplicity, there was clarity. Declan rose eventually and stepped off the porch. Relic followed immediately. They walked down toward the shoreline without urgency, each step grounded. The earth beneath them felt solid. He crouched near the water and ran his hand across its surface. Cool, unbroken. No ripples except those he created himself. Relic stepped beside him and gazed across the reflection of trees. Declan didn't look for cracks anymore. He looked at balance. He had not defeated an enemy. He had not solved a grand conspiracy. He had simply chosen to stop when something resisted. And in that choice, the mountain remained standing. As the sun dipped lower, Declan rose and turned back toward the cabin. Relic fell into step at his side, shoulder brushing against his thigh. Behind them, the lake lay calm. Above them, the pine branches caught the last light of day. No resonance, no calculation, just forest. Just breath. Just the quiet after. And in that quiet, there was something stronger than certainty. There was listening. There was, sometimes, the greatest miracles are not the mountains that move, but the moments when we choose to stop before they fall. In a world driven by numbers, predictions, and probabilities. We are taught to trust data above all else. But there are moments in life when something deeper speaks. A pause, a hesitation, a quiet warning in the heart. Some call it instinct. Some call it conscience. Some call it the voice of God. Perhaps miracles are not always lightning from the sky. Perhaps they are the unseen protection that happens when we finally listen. In this story, it was not power that saved the mountain. It was humility. It was the decision to hear what had once been ignored. And maybe that is how grace works in our own lives. Not by preventing every storm, but by giving us one more chance to choose differently. If this story touched you, let it remind you that faith is not blind, it is aware. That strength is not control, it is restraint. And that sometimes God speaks, not through noise, but through stillness. If you believe that listening can change destiny, share this story with someone who needs encouragement. Leave a comment about a moment when you felt guided or protected. Subscribe to this channel to continue exploring stories about courage, loyalty, and redemption. May God bless you, protect your home, steady your steps, and give you wisdom when the world feels uncertain. And when the ground beneath you trembles, may you always have the grace to listen.